In 1999, after a particularly difficult workday, Danielle Jennings left for lunch. Around 5 p.m. Danielle was found sleeping on the bed by her fiancé Louis Pano, who had gotten home from work. When Louise noticed that Danielle was lying down lifeless, a high-profile trial resulted from an unexpected turn of events in the police investigation into the death of the 20-year-old mother of a little child on March 15, 1999. In 1978, Danielle Jennings was born in Columbia, South Carolina, and raised in Stockton, Georgia, alongside her mother and stepfather. Despite her cheery and gregarious nature, Danielle had to mature quickly because she became pregnant at the age of 16. When Danielle's relationship with her child's father, Carl, did not work out and they broke up, she gave birth to her son Tristan in September of 1996, making her a single mother at the age of 17. Despite this, Danielle never questioned that she would be a good mother, and she soon made the acquaintance of Louise, a man who would grow to be Tristan's father. Since they were teenagers, Danielle and Louise have known one another. Although they were once friends, they are now a couple. Danielle felt content. She believed that all of her difficulties in life had been resolved when Louise took care of her and Tristan. After moving in together, Danielle secured an office job at a landscaping firm. She was happy and proud of herself for being able to secure this position. In December of 1998, Louis proposed to Danielle, who happily accepted his proposal. Danielle's life was taking off. She had a fantastic son who meant the world to her. She was getting married to the man she loved, and she had a promising future. Sadly, on March 15, 1999, all of her plans came to an abrupt end when Louis came home from work and discovered a lifeless Danielle lying on Tristan's bed at the daycare center. Louis knew Danielle was dead the moment he saw the color of her skin. When police first arrived at the couple's apartment in the Ashley Lakes complex in Norcross, Georgia, they were only told that the woman was dead and that her fiancé had called. Naturally, this raised the investigators' suspicions because partners are frequently held accountable for the deaths of their loved ones. Louis was waiting for them at the apartment's entrance, and he told them that the victim of the crime was Danielle Jennings, age 20. He claimed that upon his return from work, he discovered Danielle face down on the bed. Upon turning her over, he became aware that she was deceased. While detectives meticulously scrutinized the homicide site, Louis was brought to the station by the police to be questioned. Danielle was found lying on her back on the bed, fully clothed. She had a ligature around her neck, which looked like a stocking tied very tightly around her neck. Danielle had no chance of surviving, as the perpetrator was likely behind her when they strangled her. The bed was soiled, and one of the dresser drawers was open, possibly because the ligature was removed from Danielle's drawer after someone had emptied her purse's contents inside. The possibility that it was an attempted robbery was not ruled out by the police. The investigators did not completely rule out the possibility that they were dealing with a staged crime scene because the front door showed no signs of forced entry. There were items like cameras and jewelry that were not touched. Perhaps the perpetrator intended to steal something from the apartment but ran into Danielle and decided to kill her because she was a witness. Despite searching the entire building, they were unable to locate any proof. The sliding glass door leading to the rear was locked. After looking at everything, the investigators determined that Danielle had either given the criminal permission to enter the house or that the criminal had the house keys. Since there were no indications of forced entry, her fiancé Louis was made the primary suspect. Louis was very upset when the detectives began questioning him. Romantic relationships have the power to escalate rage to the point where it can occasionally have tragic results. The questioning started with asking Louis where he had been on the day of his fiancé's death. Louis said that he had spent the entire day at work and that the last time he had seen Danielle was when they had left the house at 6:45 a.m., but Danielle had come back to get something. Louis claimed that Danielle had been worried about the work meeting. Danielle called him at around 11:30 a.m. and asked if he wanted to go to lunch. He declined because he had a lot of work to do and couldn't leave his job. She was anxious about the crucial meeting with the management that day, and Louise felt that she was a little distracted. Later that day, Louise tried to reach Danielle, but she didn't respond. He called her co-workers and discovered that Danielle had left for lunch but hadn't come back, according to Lewis. When he got to the Ashley Lakes apartments, where they lived, he noticed something that worried him. The front door was unlocked and was ajar. Investigators asked him about his relationship with Danielle, asking if they frequently argued or had any family issues. He replied that they had a good relationship and were deeply in love, but he was depressed and said the police were wasting their time questioning him. Louis suggested that instead of questioning him, they should look for the real culprit, who was still walking freely. Detectives spoke with Danielle's friends and relatives, and they all expressed confidence that Louis could not hurt her because they were engaged to be married. Louis's co-workers verified his alibi by stating that he had been at work the entire day, therefore he was taken off the list of suspects during the interview. According to Louis, Danielle was not pleased with Jeff, a co-worker, for giving her too much attention. The moment the detectives arrived at Danielle's place of employment, they spoke with her supervisor, who verified to them that Danielle had lodged a complaint against another worker named Jeff, who works closely with her. The middle-aged man named Jeff worked as a manager for this organization. Danielle complained to her boss about Jeff's inappropriate behavior and persistent presence, saying that he was interfering with her job. Danielle and Jeff were very different in age. She was 20 and he was 40. When Jeff asked Danielle to lunch, Danielle informed him she was engaged to someone she loved. Jeff declared that if he were 20 years younger, things would be different and that he wouldn't take no for an answer. Danielle's employer took her grievances seriously, and the day she was discovered dead, she was scheduled to attend a meeting with the company's management to discuss the complaint she had filed against Jeff. She was quite anxious about this meeting. Since Jeff was the manager and she was a relatively new employee, she was scared that her career would be in jeopardy. Danielle's co-workers reported that she left the office for lunch after this meeting but never came back. This provided the investigators with a timeline for the attack on Danielle, but did Jeff play a role in it? The investigators' suspicions about Jeff grew when they discovered that he left the office at the same time the crime occurred and that he only returned in the evening. Was this just a coincidence? Investigating the possibility that Jeff followed Danielle home and attacked her when she opened the front door, possibly explaining why there were no signs of forced entry on the door, the investigators concentrated on Jeff as a potential suspect. Could Jeff have killed Danielle in retaliation for her complaint? When Jeff was brought in for interrogation, he was asked to explain his relationship with Danielle. He acknowledged having invited her to lunch, but he denied having anything to do with her passing. Although Jeff acknowledged that he liked Danielle, he said that he had not acted inappropriately toward her and expressed astonishment when she lodged a complaint against him. When the investigators asked him if Danielle's complaint was the reason he wanted to harm her, his first response was anger, and he was adamant that he wasn't the one who killed her. Jeff told the investigators that he had an alibi and that he couldn't have killed Danielle because he was with a coworker who he claimed he was with at the time of the crime. They had been together all day solving some work-related issues. The detectives met this man and he confirmed Jeff's statements. Consequently, they took someone else off the suspect list. After receiving the autopsy report the following day, investigators looked through it in the hopes of finding some information that would help them identify the perpetrator and determine what caused Danielle's death. They came to the conclusion that Danielle had been taken by surprise by the attacker, who had approached her from behind and pulled her stocking tight until she lost consciousness. The perpetrator then tied the stocking in a knot to prevent Danielle from regaining consciousness. Danielle had no defensive injuries on her body. In fact, she had none at all, save for a ligature mark on her neck. Louis was asked to go through the apartment with them again, and he carefully examined everything, saying that nothing was missing from the apartment and that everything seemed to be in its usual places. However, a few days later, Louis called the police and said he could not find Danielle's wedding ring. It is possible that Danielle did not even see the face of the person who attacked her. The police found no evidence at the crime scene that could help identify the perpetrator, including shoe prints, DNA, fingerprints, hair, and even nails. He also brought up another odd point that caught the attention of the investigators. Danielle didn't wear stockings. Thus, the stocking that was used to strangle her did not belong to her. This suggested that the person who conducted the killing had brought the stocking with them, leaving them with no proof. The detectives made the decision to look into Danielle's past because they thought that maybe what had happened to her was related to it. They asked her friends about her past relationships, especially with Carl, the father of her son Tristan, and her best friend informed the police about Danielle's ex-boyfriend Eddie. She kept hanging up when he told her to meet with him. Detectives found Eddie to be a prime suspect, so they tracked him down and brought him in for questioning. The man was hostile and showed no enthusiasm to go to the police station. When questioned about his relationship with Danielle, it was clear that it infuriated him. When asked about his version of events, he denied ever using violence against her, denied being involved in her death, and claimed that he hadn't spoken to her in over a year. However, they knew he was lying, so they looked up Danielle's call history and discovered that Eddie had been in contact with her in the months preceding her death. The police needed to know where he was when Danielle was attacked. He claimed to be working miles away from the Ashley Lakes Lowell apartments at the time, driving a tow truck and needing to travel out of state. His boss verified that Eddie was out of state on the day of Danielle's death and provided the motel and gas receipts that supported Eddie's alibi. This led to yet another dead end for the investigators, as Tristan's father Carl was not included in the suspect list. 3 days after Danielle's death, the police received a lead that changed the course of this investigation. When interviewing residents of Ashley Lakes apartments, a woman informed them of a strange situation that occurred a week before Danielle's death. The woman said she was awakened that morning by a knock. On the door, she got out of bed and looked through the peephole, but no one was there. She went back to bed. However, about a minute later, she heard the front door slam. She got scared and got out of bed again. She saw a maintenance man standing in her living room. He told her he had come to fix something in her apartment. However, this woman felt uncomfortable when he was there because he was looking at her more than doing his job. She didn't know his name, but she provided the police with a description of him. The management of Ashley Lakes apartments was contacted and informed that there had been a previous incident of a similar nature involving another woman. This woman didn't know the man who had entered her apartment and claimed to be in charge of maintenance. When she replied that she didn't have any light bulbs to change, he stammered and said, "Maybe I'm in the wrong apartment." After that, he left. There were 2 maintenance specialists at Ashley Lakes apartments, but only one of them fit the descriptions provided by both women. The investigator presented his photo to the women, and they were able to identify the man. Oliver only began working at the complex in September of 1998, which is crucial to note because at the time of Danielle's death, 10 residents reported missing computers, jewelry, and cash checks from their apartments at the same time. There were no signs of forced entry on the front doors, and one resident even suggested that someone might be to blame. Calvin Oliver had an apartment in the same residential complex, which allowed him to move around without raising any suspicions. What made matters even more suspicious was that Oliver had a master key that allowed him to enter any apartment. Could Oliver have been the one who robbed all those apartments? Calvin Oliver was the one who needed to be closely watched because he may have known that Danielle and her fiancé Louis would be at work during the day. He may have had a master key and could enter their apartment without raising suspicions. It's also possible that Danielle came home for lunch when Oliver was already inside. Investigators wanted to know if there was any connection between Calvin Oliver and Danielle Jennings, because it turned out that a few weeks prior to Danielle's death, Oliver was working in her apartment. Calvin Oliver was called in by the investigators to be questioned. When they asked him about the thefts that some Ashley Lakes apartments residents had complained about, he denied being involved. When they asked him about Danielle Jennings, he said he had heard about what had happened to her, but didn't know her. The only confession he made was that he was working in her apartment. The police lacked any hard evidence connecting Oliver to the crime before they were going to let him leave the station. They made the decision to compare him to the database. They were shocked to learn that Oliver had an adult criminal record dating back to 1974, according to Georgia Department of Correction records. He had already been convicted of at least 3 residential burglaries, armed robbery, and forcing a woman into intimate contact with him at knife point. Oliver had spent the majority of his life in prison. They also learned that he had an outstanding warrant in another jurisdiction for failing to appear on a burglary charge related to the theft of personal checks. At the conclusion of this movie, how he was able to obtain employment at Ashley Lack's apartments despite having such a bad record. After investigating the thefts at Ashley Lake's apartments, the police obtained a search warrant for Oliver's apartment. There they discovered stolen property belonging to other residents and, more importantly, Danielle's wedding ring, which connected Oliver to her death. If Oliver had been in Danielle's apartment when she entered, he had reason to hurt her because he didn't want to go back to prison because there was an active warrant for his arrest. Calvin Oliver was charged with first-degree felony and burglary 9 days after Danielle Jenkins' death. When the detectives informed him that the wedding band connected him to the case, he falsely claimed to have taken the ring approximately 3 weeks prior to her passing. On Monday, March 15, 2019, Danielle was discovered dead. However, on Sunday, March 14, 2019, some witnesses stated that the ring was still on Danielle's finger. Oliver was caught lying, and he refused to answer questions during the trial. The prosecution stated that Oliver killed Danielle when she unexpectedly came back from work and discovered him stealing. Following a 5-day trial on October 13, 2000, the jury found Oliver guilty on all counts. Oliver was given a life sentence for taking Danielle Jennings' life and a 20-year jail sentence for stealing her wedding ring, according to Sherry and Philip Jennings. Tristan, Danielle's son, was subsequently given to Danielle's mother and stepfather. It turned out that Ashley Lake's apartment's management was aware of Oliver's past legal issues, but they neglected to investigate it. Oliver spent the majority of his life in prison, and they also neglected to alert other residents when a string of thefts happened after all of this became public. Ashley Lake's apartments was sued by Danielle's family. The Jenkins filed lawsuits alleging negligent employment and retention, inadequate security, carelessness, warning negligence, nuisance, and wrongful death. They said the defendants' actions demonstrated a deliberate and wanton disregard for other people's safety. Punitive damages were what they sought. According to court records, the jury returned a verdict after the trial that exceeded $13 million for wrongful death and pain and suffering. The jury also awarded $2.5 million in punitive damages, which were later lowered to $250,000 because the jury determined that there was no specific intent to harm, according to the plaintiff attorneys. The complex's key policy was also problematic. Workers had access to resident keys, and the 240 apartment complex's lockbox frequently remained unlocked. Oliver is incarcerated for the duration of his life sentence. Sherry Jennings of Gaston, the mother of Danielle, is determined to keep her daughter's story alive after she was brutally murdered 20 years ago in Georgia. While looking at photos of her daughter as a child, Sherry says, "These are priceless. These are my most valuable possessions, all my photographs of Danielle." Sherry, who currently lives in Gaston, describes her daughter Melissa Danielle as well-behaved and outgoing. "We called her Danielle, and she was always a spunky and lively little girl." Mother and daughter grew especially close after the birth of Danielle's son, Tristan. They spoke every day, practically, and had become very close, especially as mothers. She had asked about safety from her mother, which she had always tried to teach her and other of her girls, telling them to be aware of their surroundings at all times. "You're not living in a little hometown. This is a big metropolitan city." Sherry eventually gained custody of her grandson, Tristan, and raised him in the Midlands. He's now 22 years old. Calvin Oliver was sentenced to life in prison for Danielle's murder, and an additional 10 years for stealing her diamond engagement ring.